At the time of JFK's assassination, he was in a full-on political battle with Israel. It was over 3 reasons. The biggest was over the Sonoma nuclear plant. This was a nuclear program they were running that JFK didn't want. It was against international laws. The next issue that Kennedy had with Israel was AZC. This later became AIPAC. The issue was all foreign countries need to register their foreign lobbies under FARA. Israel refused to do that. JFK was not okay with this and demanded sending multiple letters saying he will register under FARA. Thirdly, JFK was disgusted by how they treated the Palestinians. They abused, killed, steal homes. What's going on today has been going on for 80 years.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
Today we're going to cover the John F. Kennedy assassination. Now this is an extremely complex situation, so I'm going to take it and try to simplify it and make it very clear and easy to understand. I've also fact-checked everything, but I recommend you also dig in and do your own research. I also think it's very important to start this video by condemning anti-Semitism. It is the oldest and the worst type of racism. It is always mutating and changing. At the time of JFK's assassination, he was in a full-on political battle with Israel. It was over 3 reasons. The biggest was over the Sonoma nuclear plant. This was a nuclear program they were running that JFK didn't want. It was against international laws. They'd even stole the uranium from America. He was also battling them over AZC, which later came on to be AIPAC. He wanted them to register for an agent, but they were adamant that they couldn't. And thirdly, he was defending Palestinian rights. The biggest issue JFK had with Israel was the Sonoma nuclear facility. This was discovered in the early 60s, and JFK was adamant that they couldn't have it. It was against international law. He was furious they wouldn't shut it down. He had written Ben-Gurion, who was the Prime Minister of Israel, several notes. Finally, he had sent him one saying he demanded it, or it was looking like they were even going to possibly cut off aid to Israel.
Today, every inhabitant of this planet must contemplate the day when this planet may no longer be habitable. Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation or by madness. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us.
The program was illegal under international law, and JFK had discovered it in the 60s. He was adamant that it be shut down, and he'd even sent Prime Minister Ben-Gurion a letter demanding that he see it. Ben-Gurion was not having it, and as soon when he received the letter, he actually resigned.
The other problem Kennedy faced with Israel was the construction of the atomic reactor at Dimona. JFK was strongly against any proliferation of nuclear weaponry. He had been assured by Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion that Dimona was designed for peaceful uses of atomic energy. In the spring of 1963, Kennedy demanded full inspections by the U.S. of the Dimona reactor and threatened to place American aid for Israel in limbo if no agreement were reached. And at the time of his assassination, negotiations were in process for biannual inspections.
Kennedy was kind of at war with one of our foreign nations at the time, too, over some major issues.
Okay, so what you're talking about is you're talking about the nuclear issue and you're talking about the Israelis and Dimona. And so we really need to do a little, before we get to Dimona, we need to rewind. So 1945, the war ends. The pre-Israeli Zionists, as I'll call them, or from moving forward, I'll call them the Israelis, because they are. Even going back to the turn of the century, 1800s, 1920, 1930, you start to see the rise of Ben-Gurion, Chaim Weizmann, all these guys who will become the Israelis when they found the Israeli state in 48. So I just call them the Israelis going all the way back to 1900. So 1945, the war ends. We have massive amounts of military surplus. Ben-Gurion, who is the representative of the Jewish Agency in Palestine, which is the future government of Israel in waiting. Before they even had a country, they had a government ready to go. He approaches the American government and he wants weapons so he can fight the Palestinians. And once again, we told him pound sand. So you have 2 world wars gone by to get a state of Israel, which is, I'm completely convinced at this point, the entire purpose of World War I and World War II was to get the state of Israel. And it was manipulated by those forces behind the scenes. That over 500 Jewish American traitors to their country, along with other forces, broke into numerous armories and bunkers and cleaned them out, stole all the materials, and shipped them back to Israel. Wow. Let me get back to David Ben-Gurion in 1945. The Sanborn Institute, that's underway. 1946 rolls around. David Ben-Gurion sends a guy named Reuven Daphne, who's the head of the Haganah. He's an emissary of the Haganah.
Another terrorist organization people don't know.
Another terrorist organization.
An Israeli terrorist organization.
Right. You had 3, the Haganah, the Stern Gang, and the Irgun.
One of them tried to kill President Truman. Most people don't even know.
Right.
I think it was a Stern Gang. I think they did that.
So basically, Reuven Daphne meets with Bugsy Siegel in L.A.
Big-time Jewish mafia.
Big-time Jewish mafia. They meet, and Reuven Daphne says, we need money because we're fighting the Palestinians. And
I'm sorry, who's Daphne? He's
Reuven Daphne. He's their emissary from the Haganah, which was the
right.
So he's meeting Bugsy Siegel.
To make sure
right.
lose track.
He meets Bugsy Siegel, and Bugsy Siegel, he tells him that we're fighting the Palestinians, and Bugsy Siegel he's a mobster, but he's a Jew, and so he's like, "What do you mean you're fighting?" He's like, "We're fighting." He goes, "You mean fighting as in killing?" And he goes, "Yes." And he explains to him what they're doing and how they're trying to rebuild the Jewish homeland and all that stuff. By the end of the conversation, that formed the relationship between the mafia and the pre-Israeli Zionists that would go on to be the group that organized the assassination.
Yeah.
He ends up giving Reuven Daphne about $50,000 over 2 or 3 month period, which that's about $500,000 in today's money. And he takes it back to Israel. The relationship in LA particularly then continued to grow between the Israelis and
Jewish mafia,
the Jewish mafia
and the Israelis.
Right. By 1949, Mickey Cohen's personal rabbi was Menachem Begin, who was the father of all terrorism in the world.
Was Cohen the head of the LA mafia?
Yes.
Jewish mafia. A lot of people think it's Italian, but a lot of the mafia was actually the head mafia bosses were Jewish.
Right. Let me explain something. The mob was run by Jews. It wasn't run by Italians. The Italians ran the local mob, and the Jews ran the large-scale international syndicate. So the Jewish mob is the mob.
Yeah. The primary crime boss was Meyer Linsky, correct?
Correct. The mob boss of all time from 1931 till the very end in the 1970s was Meyer Lansky.
He never went to prison. All the other ones did, but he ran, I'm sure you know this, he ran big blackmail operations like the original Epstein. He had blackmail allegedly on J. Edgar Hoover.
J. Edgar Hoover. But that relationship is the relationship that people need to understand, because that's the relationship that killed Kennedy. When it comes to the Israelis, you have the relationship with the mob going back, like we talked about, and all the stealing from the bunkers. Yeah. But Zalman Shapiro started the New Mint Corporation, and over a period from 56 to 64-ish, they stole about 500 pounds or 600 pounds of enriched uranium.
The next issue that Kennedy had with Israel was AZC. This later became AIPAC. The issue was all foreign countries need to register their foreign lobbies under FARA. Israel refused to do that. JFK was not okay with this and demanded sending multiple letters saying you will register under FARA. Israel wasn't having it.
Have you ever wondered how we got to this point, where one of the biggest lobbying groups in America can openly brag that they are representing a foreign country? This is from AIPAC's website, but somehow they don't have to register under the FARA Act as someone acting on behalf of a foreign actor. They literally brag about how many millions they spent and about how 98% of their buying of our politicians was successful this election cycle. Did you know that they were actually this close to having to register as a foreign agent before a certain thing happened? Here, I'll show you, and I'll show you where you can find all these primary sources too. So if you go to this URL right here, israellobby.org/AZCDOJ, it's a history of when AIPAC almost had to register as a foreign agent. And back then, they were known as the American Zionist Council. Right there, the American Zionist Council. Well, it turns out that President John F. Kennedy was about to force them to register under FARA. And this is a history of all of the original documents that pertain to the legal case. And when you click on any of these links, it'll take you to original archived sources of the actual documents from the actual testimonies that you can read. Even cool little snippets like this that say federal lawyers are near a decision on whether to require the AZC to register as an agent of the Israeli government. And back in June and July of 1963, the federal government was nearing a decision requiring the American Zionist Council registering as an agent of the Israeli government. Americans of whatever faith believe firmly that America is their country and America alone. The Zionist lawyer, Mr. Lenvin, advised that public registration would be injurious to the American Zionist Council. You might notice that the Honorable Donald Rumsfeld was involved. And as 1963 went on, it all heated up. And by October of 1963, they were saying things like forms are enclosed for the use of the American Zionist Council in registering under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. But then what happened in November of 1963?
There's a cover-up that's about to happen here.
The president who was spearheading the whole thing just suddenly wasn't there anymore. And to be clear, I would never infer that Israel had anything to do with that whole thing. I'm just saying it was really convenient timing that it happened to turn out that way.
And thirdly, JFK was disgusted by how they treated the Palestinians. They abused, killed, steal homes. What's going on today has been going on for 80 years. John F. Kennedy was shot November 22nd, 1963. It was filmed by Abraham Zapruder. He's a Jewish immigrant from Ukraine. He was standing oddly on a block, ready to film. Many people don't know, but the film you see wasn't released for almost 15 years later. And oddly, there's a minimum of 4 frames missing. Some people speculate dozens or even hundreds.
At around 12:30 p.m., Zapruder positioned himself on a concrete pedestal 65 feet from Elm Street and started rolling. He captured the lead motorcycles in the presidential motorcade moving across Elm Street, with admirers eagerly waiting for the president. Then came the presidential limousine, revealing the charismatic Kennedy in the back seat with his wife. Zapruder would have been content with capturing the president and his wife waving at the crowd as they passed him by. But then he heard a loud noise, followed by another. The dressmaker kept rolling, and that's how he captured the only piece of media that covered the assassination of John F. Kennedy from start to finish. But things got even more interesting for Zapruder after he realized what he had on his hands. Zapruder had a lot of leverage when it came to negotiating with the media, but the men who came knocking weren't necessarily from the press. Zapruder all of a sudden found himself talking to the men in black, more specifically, a man from the CIA named Forrest Sorrells, who got involved in helping with developing the film. If you want to pull out the tinfoil hat early on, you put air quotes around the help and helping from now on. Anyway, Sorrells helped Zapruder develop the film at an Eastman Kodak lab, and within a day, Zapruder had a historic piece of media ready to be bought by the media. And so began the bidding war. While Zapruder had the original, he was no longer the only one with a copy of the film. Agent Sorrells had taken 2 copies after assuring Zapruder that the film would be used for investigative purposes only. The originals were up for bidding, and Time Inc. and Life magazine were the only standing candidates after CBS's bid fell too short. Ultimately, Life magazine won, but on one condition: that one frame from the film be excluded from publication. But why? Because Zapruder had a nightmare when he saw a spot on Times Square advertising, "See the president's head explode." So he wanted to keep the frame that showed the president's head exploding from being used in the published cut. Frame 313 was never broadcast. Heck, the entire film was tucked away for a long time. Media rights for the film were sold in 1963, but the film was first shown on TV in 1969. Frame 313 was excluded from all public versions of the film until March 6, 1975. A segment on ABC's Good Night America showed the main portion of the Zapruder film in its entirety. Then came the dramatic moment when viewers saw the assassination that they had only read or heard about. For over a decade, the American public had only seen Kennedy getting shot once in the neck, followed by him collapsing after the second shot. They had never seen the actual moment of impact.
Thanks for watching Fight Back Podcast. If you like the show, like, subscribe, or share the video. There's also donation links in the descriptions. The official story is that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and killed JFK. Something interesting recently came out in 2023. He was being followed by a CIA agent. His name was Reuben Efron. Now, he happened to be born in Lithuania and also Jewish. Reuben Efron wasn't even born in America, and after retiring from the CIA, moved back to Israel. Some people would even claim he has dual loyalty. Personally, I think that's an anti-Semitic trope. Now, Reuben Efron's boss was James Angleton. There's lots of strange things about Angleton. He was the head of the CIA counterintelligence, but he worked directly with Mossad. He also had a file on Oswald that started in 1959. So they had been surveying him for 4 years before the assassination. And it gets even worse. After the assassination, he took documents and hid them from the Warren Commission, which the Warren Commission is the commission that investigated the assassination.
I'm going to fill in an aspect of the JFK assassination that has been covered up even longer than everything else that's been covered up. All right, let's get into it. Israel's possible involvement in the JFK assassination. At the heart of understanding this is James Jesus Angleton, one of the most powerful men within the CIA at that time, one of the top criminals amongst a sea of criminals. Angleton was also the CIA's liaison to Mossad, Israel's intelligence organization. Veteran CIA counterintelligence chief James Angleton secretly oversaw a top-level spy ring involving Jewish immigrants and Israeli operatives without any clearance from Congress or Langley itself, according to recently declassified documents. And not only were Angleton's connections to Israel kept secret, in many cases, they were some of the only information scrubbed from various JFK files. This was the secret behind the secrets. So here are the unredacted JFK files. As you can see on the previous version, there are a bunch of redactions. Then in the unredacted 2018 version, we see that everything that was redacted is related to Angleton's connections to Israel. It's now well known that Angleton and the CIA were monitoring and controlling the movements of Lee Harvey Oswald for years prior to the JFK assassination. A document released in 2023 from the JFK archive reveals that Reuben Efron, a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army and a Jewish immigrant from Lithuania, was reading purported triggerman Lee Harvey Oswald's private mail. Efron was a Zionist and later moved to Israel. But at that time, he was reporting directly to Angleton, reading the mail of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Now, something even more bizarre is after Angleton's death, Israel held a secret tree planting ceremony for him. This is something extremely rare and mostly only done for Jews or people that have tremendously helped Israel. How did he help them? Well, it is also speculated, well, it's not speculated, it's known that he knew Israel was stealing America's nuclear secrets and uranium, and many people think he was actually actively involved in it. And what did JFK want to do? Shut down the nuclear program that Angleton was helping Israel create.
Kennedy was killed. Lyndon Johnson signed off and let the Israelis do what they want. They opened the Dimona facility in 1968. Americans didn't even know because Johnson put out a directive. He said, don't talk about it. But definitely there was malice, a forethought in getting rid of Kennedy, and because they saw the danger that he represented.
Also, we don't even really know what the Eisenhower policy was. The testimony has a passage which suggests that the Eisenhower administration had somehow agreed, perhaps to compensate for the Suez crisis and the way that the U.S. intervened on the side of the Arabs instead of on the side of Israel and the British and French. Perhaps because of that, somebody in the Eisenhower administration, whether Eisenhower himself or maybe Dulles and then Angleton, following what Dulles says, they essentially help the Israelis to get a nuclear bomb. And so Angleton has two monuments to him in Israel. He seems to have been functionally an Israeli agent.
And in fact, he became very much the biggest Zionist of the lot, as Meir Amit, the head of the Mossad in the 1960s, said. And as I show in the book, Angleton was, I don't know if instrumental is the right word. It was on his watch that the Israelis stole a huge amount of fissile material from the United States and used it to build their first nuclear weapons. Angleton knew all of the people who were on the secret Israeli program to build nuclear weapons, and he didn't do anything to stop it. He didn't do anything to investigate it. And I talked to one of his colleagues, or got the notes of one of his colleagues, who said that Angleton had actually assisted the Israelis in obtaining nuclear weapons against the wishes of U.S. policymakers. So that was part of the reason why Angleton was revered in Israel, frankly, was because I believe he helped them obtain nuclear weapons when nobody else would.
How in the world?
So that's also part of his legacy.
I can imagine. How in the world did he weather that storm with facilitating the smuggling of nuclear materials out of the country to a foreign country? How in the world does he get through that with his career intact, I wonder?
Well, it was not known at all during his career. The efforts to investigate there were efforts to investigate it after, in the Carter administration, after he had left the government, and the CIA scientific community, the CIA resisted those efforts to investigate. And so the full story really didn't come out until much later.
Hey guys, I'm demonetized everywhere. So if you want to support me and the podcast, go to fightbackpodcast.com and you can buy some cool merch like the shirt I'm wearing now. As many of you guys know, I run a free speech podcast. That comes at a price of being demonetized everywhere. So one way to support the podcast is to buy your books from AntelopeHillPublishing.com. Today's selection is the Trans-Industrial Complex. This book covers the money-making machine of the trans industries and shows it's not to help people, but to make money and get rich. So again, if you want to support the podcast, go to AntelopeHillPublishing.com and be sure to use promo code FIGHTBACK. That'll save you money and support me. Thank you. Now we're going to get into Jack Ruby, real name Jacob Rubenstein. He is the man that killed Lee Harvey Oswald.
Despite the fact that he'd been known for pretty much his entire residency in Dallas as Jack Ruby, the indictment for the murder of Oswald was against Jacob Rubenstein. And to hear the recording of Chief Curry reading the indictment to reporters, practically sneering the name, it's hard to not think that the intent was to make sure that the entire world knew that it was a Jew who had killed Oswald. This is not necessarily to implicate Curry as an anti-Semite, but rather to indicate that in 1963, even with Jews relatively prominent in the city, bigotry was so ingrained in Dallas's culture as to not be even given a second thought. Interestingly, in a meeting with Rabbi Silverman on January 13, 1964, DA Henry Wade, like Roe v. Wade, made a point of telling the rabbi, "I want you to know that I did not intend to be anti-Semitic when I used the name Rubenstein and not Ruby." Silverman, who frequently visited Ruby in prison, often several times a week, starting a day or two after Ruby's crime, isn't sure if he was asked to do so by Jack or his family, or just decided on his own to visit his imprisoned congregant. As he said, "I have a feeling that I took it upon myself, though he might have asked. I just don't remember. And I know that he wanted to see a rabbi, or his rabbi, because he asked me for a Bible and for a prayer book. He wanted someone to bring him a bit of inspiration and comfort." Silverman says of one early visit, "Ruby told me that he had read from the book of Daniel. His jailer, Stevenson, a member of the Foursquare Gospel Church, is a fundamentalist Baptist. He has been telling Jack stories from the Bible and explaining them to him. Jack had read the entire book of Daniel. He told me that Daniel also had many problems and faced them with great courage. This book will give me courage too." It's generally been assumed that Stevenson was at the most benign, trying to encourage Ruby to convert to Christianity, and at worst, trying to lull him into admitting some kind of premeditation, or possibly both. On the rabbi's third visit, somewhere within a few days of the second, approximately a week after Oswald's murder, Silverman observed, Ruby had begun to read from the book of Judges. I liked the story of Gideon and the trumpets, Samson and Deborah. Although the Bible can work as metaphor, consolation, and inspiration, and so almost any section that Ruby would cite could plausibly be interpreted in terms of a situation, it's worth noting the Bible tales he mentioned to Silverman. The story of Gideon is about a small band of soldiers tricking a much larger, more powerful enemy using loud trumpets to make their own forces seem larger and more formidable, leading to victory. The biblical Samson was defeated by Delilah, then regained his strength and triumphed. And Deborah was a warrior prophet who led the children of Israel to triumph in battle, which ushered in 40 years of peace. All three stories are about adversity overcome and happiness achieved. Right after his entry about Gideon, Samson, and Deborah, Silverman reported that Jack Ruby said to me, the other night I saw God in a picture of my mother. Ruby seemed to be living in multiple planes, and this changing relationship with reality would only become increasingly pronounced. Arguably, his crime and arrest accelerated what was probably brewing in him for a while. In his mind, he was the central figure in a drama, like Daniel in the lion's den, in a world where he believed that the fates of entire peoples were determined by his actions.
The official story is he killed him because he was a huge fan of JFK, but in reality, he told the Warren Commission that he didn't even vote and implied that he wasn't a fan. At that point, they stopped the interview and stopped asking questions. Now, a little bizarre, first off, he was moved by Police Chief Curry. Everyone else said, no, don't move him publicly, keep it private, but they did a public moving. And somehow, Jacob Rubenstein was able to get into a highly guarded police station with a gun. It's not easy to get in a highly guarded police station. He walked up, shot him dead.
Well, my responsibility with the Warren Commission, I was assistant counsel to the Warren Commission, was the activity of Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby actually was the first private conspiracy investigator. Why do I say that? What was this all about? Because Jack Ruby very quickly came to suspect and fear that Jews were going to be blamed for the assassination of President Kennedy. Ruby's name at birth was Jacob Rubenstein. His family all changed their name in the late 1940s, so he was known as Jack Ruby when he was in Dallas. But like any person who has grown up as a member of the Jewish faith, the awareness of anti-Semitism was very prominent. When Jack Ruby heard about the assassination of President Kennedy, he was in the Dallas Morning News advertising department. He operated in Dallas a striptease club, and he was placing ads for the weekend activities. There was a full-page, black-bordered advertisement, anti-Kennedy advertisement, in the Dallas Morning News on the day of the assassination. Ruby had seen this ad even before he heard about the assassination of the president. But when word came, and Ruby was at the Dallas Morning News at that point, when word came that the president had been shot, Ruby was very, very upset about this advertisement. It was an anti-Kennedy advertisement. It was signed with the name Bernard Weissman, and it had a black border on it. Full-page advertisement. Ruby was a Kennedy fan, and he did not believe that anybody who was Jewish would be anti-Kennedy. So he associated in his own mind the black border with some foretelling of Kennedy's death, and began to think that the black bordered advertisement with the Weissman name was in some way connected to the assassination. So he began to search for Weissman. Ruby was a first-class investigator. He looked in the telephone directory and didn't find Bernard Weissman's name. A friend of his suggested that he look in a street directory, and he didn't find Weissman's name. In fact, he didn't know of anybody named Weissman. And he believed that there was no such person as Weissman. In fact, there was, and we can talk about that story later. But his own perspective was that nobody who was Jewish would sign an anti-Kennedy ad. And therefore, the name Bernard Weissman was placed on the ad, and the ad was through the black border on the ad must be connected with the assassination, and Jews would be blamed because of the connection with this ad. So he began to get as much information as he could about Weissman. He went to temple services that Friday night, and then after temple services, he went to a delicatessen where he bought 6 corned beef sandwiches and six soft drinks and took them to the police station as a way to get into the police station. And because of his own business of operating nightclubs, he knew police officers. He had to keep in order to keep his business out of difficulty. It was helpful to know police officers. In fact, there was a Dallas police officer that was dating and ultimately married one of his strippers. So Ruby went with his corned beef sandwiches to the Dallas Police Department. The police said they'd already had meals. They didn't need anything, but he stayed on anyhow and told the Dallas police that he was a reporter for the Israeli, a translator for the Israeli news. And he made himself a little badge, made badge that he put on his coat. He was dressed as people were in the 60s with a coat and tie and suit, and as someone would have been who had gone to Friday night services. When Oswald was finally presented at a midnight press conference on the night of the assassination, Ruby was present. And I'm sorry we don't have the photograph of Ruby, because it's very clear that Ruby is standing in a group of newspaper reporters with a pen or a pencil in his hand and a notebook. He spent the time after Oswald was presented for viewing. He then helped the out-of-town newspaper reporters get interviews with Henry Wade, who incidentally is the Wade of Roe v. Wade.
There's lots of weird things about Jacob Rubenstein, or Jack Ruby. He was clearly tied in with the mafia. Lots of people think he was directly connected with Meyer Lansky and even the Brofman family. The Brofman family was part of MAGA Group, which is Lex Wexner, which is the Jeffrey Epstein operation. But we're not going to get into that. And the ties, they're not 100% conclusive, but it looks very likely. But let's go back to the Warren Commission, where they were interviewing Jack Ruby. The official story is he killed him because he had so much love for Kennedy and wanted to be a hero. But at one point during the interview, after he was mock crying, he looks up at him and goes, "I must be a great actor, I tell you that. They didn't ask any questions. If I love the president so much, why wasn't I at the parade? It's strange that perhaps I didn't vote for President Kennedy, or didn't vote at all, that I should build such a great affection for him." Shortly after they stopped the interview.
You can't talk about the Kennedy assassination without talking about Israel, without talking about the Mossad. They're the main people involved. That's the main group involved. The prime minister of Israel at the time said that without nuclear weapons, Israel would not survive. Kennedy was asking and asking and asking for neutral scientists to observe the reactor. He continued to push for this with CIA Director McCone, and finally was granted access. Israel, prior to the visit, set up a fake control room with fake control panels, and part of the agreement was that the inspectors were never going to be able to inspect the actual reactor. After that visit, Kennedy was quoted in saying, "Those sons of bitches lie to me constantly about their nuclear capability." the Jewish community invites JFK to come to Dallas, which was sponsored by the Dallas Citizens Council, which was directed by Julius Sheps, who was a member of the local B'nai B'rith organization, the ADL B'nai B'rith, once again, a confirmed member of the local B'nai B'rith as well. Abraham Zapruder was also just so happened to be the guy that caught the assassination on film. Zapruder was also a manufacturer headquartered in the Dallas Textiles building. According to ballistic studies, it was from that building the first two shots were fired and missed. The building was owned by David Weisblatt, one of the biggest financiers of the Anti-Defamation League, and Douglas Jaffe, one of the biggest donors to Lyndon B. Johnson. The host committee that invited Kennedy to the event in Dallas was chaired by a guy named Sam Bloom. According to Dallas police, it was Bloom who pushed the hardest for the police to transfer Lee Harvey Oswald from the Dallas police station to the Dallas County Jail. Now, it was during that transfer that Jack Ruby shot Oswald. What was Jack Ruby's real last name? Jakob Rubinstein. The reactor went critical right after Kennedy died, and they got the bomb a year or two later. That's kind of a coincidence, isn't it? It's kind of a strange coincidence. Kennedy dies, Israel gets the bomb. Gets the bomb.
Now, another weird coincidence is Yitzhak Rabin happened to be in Dallas during the assassination. For those that don't know, he was one of the head IDF officials and later went on to be the Prime Minister of Israel. Now, I want to be very clear. I want to condemn all anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. These are all just coincidences. There's multiple conspiracy theories about the JFK assassination because it didn't make sense. Here's where Arnon Michelin comes in. He came in and made a movie called JFK with multiple conspiracy theories showing connections potentially mob, CIA, but he happened to leave out all Israeli or Jewish connections. Now let's look into where he's from. He was born in Israel, he's a self-admitted Israeli spy, and he even stole nuclear triggers from the United States. He should be in prison, but charges were never pressed.
Justin Timberlake, Vince Vaughn, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Just a few of the stars Hollywood producer Arnon Milchan has rubbed shoulders with. But it's his story that should be made into a movie. The Israeli-born businessman behind hits like 12 Years a Slave,
I have a business proposition for you.
Pretty Woman,
Come on, hit me before I lose my nerve.
and Fight Club, says he spent years as an Israeli secret agent and arms dealer. In a stunning interview that aired Monday on an Israeli investigative program, Milchan detailed how he was recruited in the 1960s to Israel's Bureau of Scientific Relations, where he helped gather technology to further Israel's still unacknowledged nuclear program, saying, quote, "I did it for my country, and I'm proud of it." Milchan moved to Hollywood in the 1970s, but he suggested his efforts on behalf of the Israeli government didn't end completely. Milchan indicated other big Hollywood players were also involved, saying, quote, "When I came to Hollywood, I detached myself completely from my physical activities to dedicate myself to what I really wanted, filmmaking. But sometimes it gets mixed up." The 68-year-old Milchan owns New Regency Films and has produced more than 120 movies, working closely with directors such as Martin Scorsese and Oliver Stone.
Now, the film did cover mafia connections, but it covered the Italian mafia. And there was likely mafia connections with the JFK assassination, but it was figures like Mickey Cohen and Meyer Lansky, and they weren't Italian.
Hollywood has a long history of famous names who did espionage work on the side, ranging from big screen superstars like Greta Garbo to TV chef Julia Child.
Now, a new tale of international intrigue is coming to light, this one about film producer Arnon Milchan. As Carter Evans reports, his double life was a not so closely held secret for decades.
Arnon Milchan was the driving force behind dozens of box office blockbusters, like Fight Club and Pretty Woman. But behind the scenes, the Israeli-born Hollywood producer was also becoming one of his country's largest weapons dealers. In a recent interview for an Israeli documentary, Milchan confirmed what had been rumored for years. He was working for Israel's top spy agency all along. He even shared that with famous friends.
I remember at some point I had asked Arnon about that. Being friends, I was curious, but not in an accusatory way. I just wanted to know. And he said, yeah, I did. I'm Israeli. That's my country.
Do his admissions in this report back up what he says in your book?
Yes, and it's even like sometimes word by word.
Mayor Daron spent months interviewing Arnon Milchan for a book he co-wrote 2 years ago about the producer's secret life.
He basically told us about like secretive operations that he did for the state of Israel, especially in order to get material, information, equipments for the Israeli nuclear program.
So he admitted to you he was a spy?
Yes.
Milchan declined to authorize the book when it was published, but it wasn't the first time he answered questions about his past.
At that time, you felt like maybe, everybody looked to me like a James Bond.
In 2000, Milchan told 60 Minutes how he used dozens of his companies around the world to facilitate sales of hundreds of millions of dollars of missiles and other weapons to Israel. But he hated being called an arms dealer.
In my language, the word arms dealer is somebody who sells arms to all kind of shady countries to make money or to start revolutions and makes a buck out of it. This is clearly what I was not.
And he flat out denied working for the Israeli government.
Was I a spy? No, I was not a spy.
Milchan now says he was integral to developing Israel's nuclear program. In the Israeli documentary, he claims he even attempted to recruit a senior U.S. nuclear scientist by inviting him to meet actor Richard Dreyfuss at his home.
Israel basically built all her centrifuges to enrich uranium based on information that Milchan collected for them.
So this information that the Israeli government used to build these nuclear centrifuges was obtained from his spying?
Yes, absolutely, directly.
Milchan told both Daron and the new documentary that he never broke any laws, and he doesn't fear prosecution by the United States, even though one of his associates was convicted of illegally exporting nuclear triggers to Israel. As for his reputation in Hollywood, he had a simple answer.
Hollywood, that's what he told me. Hollywood looks for hits. If I will be able to provide hits, they will work with me.
So as long as you can produce a hit in Hollywood, you're in good shape.
You're in good shape.
Now he has that hit. He's a producer on the Oscar favorite 12 Years a Slave, putting him on course for a walk down another red carpet in March.
He wants this Oscar.
This is his dream, ultimate dream.
So it wouldn't surprise you to hear that possibly this may have had a bit to do with publicity.
Yes. And he's a wizard of publicity.
For CBS This Morning Saturday, Carter Evans, Los Angeles.
He's a multi-billionaire, but he says he never profited from that spy work.
But he was still a spy.
Now, to investigate the assassination, the Warren Commission was set up. That was set up by Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon Johnson became president of the United States after Kennedy was killed. He was also one of the most pro-Israeli presidents of all time. He switched stances on the nuclear secrets. He didn't make them register as a foreign agent. He even helped cover up the attack on the USS Liberty. Now, everything about the Warren Commission was a complete sham. I'm not going to get too in-depth because that would take a full episode, but something that really stands out is Arlen Specter. He came up with the lone bullet, or what they call the magic bullet theory. Is what this theory says is this bullet did 7 entry and exit wounds going through clothes, skin, bone, changing directions. Just absolutely absurd. He also happens to be, his family, he happens to be Jewish with family also from Ukraine. Just a pattern I keep seeing a lot here.
The big one for me was always the bullet. The bullet's ridiculous. That bullet did not go through 2 fucking people and come out looking like that. That's not what happens to bullets. Bullets get destroyed. They get blown apart. They've never been able to shoot a bullet through 2 people's bodies and have it ricochet and move around like that and not distort and look like they just shot it into a pool. Looks like they shot it into a bag of pillows. It doesn't look anything like something that shattered bones. And they found evidence of like fragments in Connolly's wrist. And there's not enough fragments missing from this magic bullet that they found. And the only reason why they found the magic bullet at all, they had to come up with this theory because a guy had gotten hit by a ricochet in the underpass. So then they had to attribute all these different wounds to one bullet, wounds on 2 different people. And bullets do weird shit. The path of the bullet doesn't bother me as much. When people say, like, bullet's not going to go here and here, and yeah, it would. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
When I started looking at the JFK assassination, I went down a million rabbit holes. It just goes on and on. There's so many directions I could keep going, but I wanted to keep this video super quick and short and and easy. If you want more in-depth stuff, you can look for Ryan Dawson, Corey Hughes. They do great work on this. I just want to end this with a very important message. Even though Israel and lots of Jews from Poland and Ukraine keep popping up, we don't want to spread any anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, so surely it was Oswald. As many of you know, I have many controversial guests, so that comes at a cost of being demonetized everywhere. So if you want to support the program, go to fightbackpodcast.com, and I have all kinds of merch on there, whether it's jiu-jitsu, fighting, political, and other accessories. And thanks for the support.